Joining us now for World Brief and the review of some of the headlines of today's newspapers from around the world is our Zimbabwe wife, Vimbai Mutihiri Ekpeyong. Good morning.
Good morning, Dr. Abati. Welcome back from Oyo State. That was
straight back from leave.
Straight back from.
Everyone should go on leave. You look amazing.
Right? So maybe they can extend my leave, right?
Yes.
No, not at this time.
And even us that still have leave that we have to come back Pajawiri, maybe they can still give us the remaining leg of our leave till the end of the year.
There's a lot of work during this season.
You're welcome back.
Thank you very much.
You look so
Thank
good.
you. Well, I mean, I still saw you out there in the festivities, but it was a lovely leave indeed, and great to be back and straight into business as I hold the fort for Adefemi, who's also gone on a much-needed break. Let's begin with international news, as the State Department announced Tuesday that it was barring 5 Europeans that it accused of leading efforts to pressure U.S. tech firms to censor or suppress American viewpoints. In a post on X, Secretary of State Marco Rubio wrote, "For far too long, ideologues in Europe have led organized efforts to coerce American platforms to punish American viewpoints they oppose. The Trump administration will no longer tolerate these egregious acts of extraterritorial censorship." Goodness me, that's a mouthful. Now, Rubio's statement said that those to be sanctioned had advanced foreign government censorship campaigns against Americans and U.S. companies, which he said created, and I quote, potentially serious adverse foreign policy consequences for the U.S. The action to bar them from the U.S. is part of a Trump administration campaign against foreign influence over online speech using immigration law rather than platform regulations or sanctions. Those said to be included in the list represent organizations that address digital hate. Now, let's bring the conversation back to the African continent, as just weeks after the Washington Accords and the Doha peace deals celebrated what many hoped could be a new beginning, the complexities of a ceasefire in eastern Congo have deepened, as the withdrawal of the M23 troops was met with protests by some citizens in the strategic hub of Uvira. Now, they took to the streets to protest because they're demanding the return of those M23 troops to their town amidst reported incidents of exchanges of gunfire. The allegations are twofold. Now, while some claim that the DRC Army and the Congolese National Police are being violent towards the indigents of the area, this is an allegation that also has deep historical roots. However, the Congolese government claim that the M23 soldiers are parading as policemen and intimidating locals to stage protests to demand their return to the region. Now, of course, you would recall that the M23 invaded Uvira before the ink had barely dried on Donald Trump's peace deal that mandated that both Rwanda and DRC refrain from supporting armed groups. Now, whilst they were not a party to the deal, they were a part of the deal brokered in Qatar on November 15th. Now, both of these agreements have, of course, now been violated before the armed groups eventually began to withdraw from the region. The protesting group has submitted a memorandum to the United Nations Organization Stabilization Mission in the DRC, that's MONUSCO, signed by key members of civil society in the region. We wait to see how this will unfold. Now, close by, well, not close by, now to West Africa. Burkina Faso military head of state, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, has called on West African nations to prepare for what he has tagged a black winter. Let's hear him.
Il sera un hiver très froid, un hiver sanglant, un hiver meurtrier. Qu'adviendra-t-il donc du panafricanisme quand l'hiver viendra? L'hiver viendra parce que la guerre se transporte en Afrique de l'Ouest. Les impérialistes font tout pour mettre l'Afrique de l'Ouest à feu et à sang. Beaucoup de gens pourraient mourir. Nous allons nous entretuer de manière tellement atroce que pendant ce temps, ils seraient là à piller nos richesses, à imposer leur volonté. Et ceux qui vont survivre de cette tragédie n'auront que deux choix. Soit s'unir.
Well, very bold remarks there that were made at the second Head of State Summit of the Alliance des États Sahel, AES, which is currently taking place in Bamako in Mali. In his speech, he emphasized his view that imperialist powers are preparing to unleash a violent and deadly war in the region in order to seize wealth. He also criticized what he feels is the hypocrisy of democracy in the region, stating that when democracy violates its own rules, they turn a blind eye. But they are ready to insult and discredit us, as he declared that the Black Winter is coming, according to him. The second AES summit, also attended by military heads of states Assimi Goïta and Abdourahmane Tiani, has also seen the inauguration of the AES's financial arm. That's the Confederal Bank for Investment and Development, with a reported capital base of $900 million. The launch of a regional television network called AES Television and a 5,000-man tri-country joint military force targeted at countering Islamic insurgency in the region. With these developments, the question is there a growing possibility that the AES can gain legitimacy? And also, what are the implications of these latest developments for ECOWAS and the region at large? Well, those are some of the stories we're taking from our world brief with our international news. But let's quickly dive into our newspaper headlines for the day before we get comments. Of course, as always, we begin with This Day, our newspaper of record. And of course, it leads with the unfolding developments within Nigeria's main opposition, the PDP. That's after a day of double revelations, double wahala. The first, of course, being a takeaway from the media chat with one of the party's last standing governors, Makinde. Of course, we've already gone into deep detail around that. He shared more about his fallout with his former ally and Minister of FCT, Wike. The headline just above, reading, fresh trouble for PDP as INEC rejects new national officers, cites court ruling. Well, above the masthead is a continuation of reactions from the Senate to the 58.47 trillion naira 2026 appropriation bill, and of course includes a note about the 2025 budget cycle being extended to March. And we'll roll that over to Punch newspaper. Again, this has already been discussed at length this morning, and Punch focuses on budget crisis. NAS extends 2025 fiscal year to March. Now, two major takeaways. Number one, that although the focus was on the budget, we saw a departure from what we saw last year. There was somewhat more robust debate and engagement in the Senate as opposed to last year where it was just sort of a smooth passage. And the second thing, however, is that we would have expected to see some sort of deliberation around tax, especially given all of the scandal we're currently seeing. And that didn't happen on the floor of the Senate yesterday. And on that note, we now go to Daily Trust newspaper, which is focusing on the bold headline, tax laws face legitimacy crisis. Of course, we know that this is the Nigerian Bar Association has now demanded the immediate suspension of the tax laws pending a comprehensive investigation over allegations of discrepancies between the laws passed by the Assembly and those gazetted into law. And I'm so glad that Taiwo Oyedele, who I saw outside already, he's on standby for the conversation he will have on the morning show. Vanguard newspaper, still on tax, Gazette furore, NBA Atiku seek suspension of tax laws. But also on the front page is a comment from Governor of Katsina State, that's Governor Diko Rada, who says that he insists that the federal government gets 52% of federation revenue, and he says that we should leave governors alone, that we should stop blaming governors for hardship because the FG actually gets the bulk of the allocation. Now let's go to Kenya. Standard newspaper in Kenya, and Kenya's already counting down. Of course, today is Christmas Eve. We're already looking at a forecast of what Christmas in Kenya might look like, and they're saying pain on Christmas, as the newspaper reports that millions of families will be marking the day in sorrow due to high cost of living, insecurity, punitive taxation, and unemployment, which have washed away the cheer as politicians display lavishness. And unfortunately, I think this is a headline we can copy and paste in a lot of African countries this year. Now to the Washington Post, still on Christmas, but slightly different. Washington Post takes us to a beautiful Christmas tree in Gaza. And of course, this is for the first time in 3 years where Gaza Strip's small Christian community will be able to celebrate Christmas. On Sunday, the Latin Patriarch of Jerusalem led a Christmas Eve Mass at Holy Family Church, and a member of the congregation commented that whilst it will not be full of joy, it is an attempt to renew life in Gaza City. And we now close with the explosive revelations that continue to come out of the Epstein files in the Daily Telegraph. Former Prince Andrew, find me inappropriate friends, is the latest revelations from some of those emails that were sent to Ghislaine Maxwell, amongst a number of other inappropriate, perverted requests, as we continue to see more of the files coming out. However, there are complaints about why certain things are redacted and who benefits from the portions of the files that are being redacted, and whether the Trump administration is trying to weaponize this in a bid to somehow exonerate and separate Donald Trump from it, whilst, throwing the blame on everybody else. It's a lot going on with those Epstein files. I'm going to hand over. So we've got West Africa, Burkina Faso, we've got M23 and DR Congo, American sanctions on the EU officials, and of course all that's happening here in Nigeria as well.
Most probably we've got you back, Vimbai, and we're excited about that. Quickly, we're not surprised. We have an idea of the very lurid conversations that went on with Ghislaine Maxwell, and which, by the way, we all know the historical antecedents of our father in the first place. So when we hear that Ghislaine Maxwell did all what she did with Epstein, we know where she's coming from.
She was groomed too.
We don't want to go through the Maxwell conundrum again. But it is obvious that a lot went down. Randy Andy, as it was fondly called, sent a lot of very interesting messages. And it is obvious that there's a lot of redaction going on because Trump wants to protect himself. And the DOJ, I don't know, you're supposed to be an independent arbiter in this, but all of a sudden you are the one defending Trump and saying the other day, I think it was reading on Axios, that DOJ was saying that, most of the things in there does not really indict Trump, so I don't know what people are talking about. That's the DOJ speaking here. But the truth about this is, the truth might not come out now, but when Trump leaves office, any government there will release that version unredacted. So he might just keep the disgrace and the shame away from now. Why people are protesting in support of M23 is war fatigue. They said M23 brought some level of stability, which is not a good stability anyway, because the sovereign country of Congo has to bring that level of stability, but it's just war fatigue. The people in Ivora are tired of the fight. They're tired of the war, so they're saying, let's stay back. Let M23 stay back. But it's not the solution to the problem. The solution is both parties, Tshisekedi and the president of Rwanda, coming together and Iran are solving this problem, because they can actually solve this problem by themselves if they want, and not any external party like Donald Trump trying to take credit for it. The AES is gaining a lot of grounds. You cannot deny that. That's the fact and ground.
Let me start with AES then. Captain Traore, at that summit, we just had the heads of state summits for ECOWAS. I think it's part of the war that he talks about in this region is actually the disunity in this region. Mm-hmm. And to be honest, AES gaining ground is part of that division because we're better together. Let me use that line. With regards to ECOWAS, I don't blame them because they have given reasons. They don't trust ECOWAS's integrity to represent the region, especially against foreign influence. However, I do believe that one of the greatest challenges we have as a continent and as a region is the fact that we are divided. And I believe that it's a loophole that the West has been able to use to perpetrate this black winter or this war that he's talking about. So one of the things I'll be looking for them to do is to see how we can collaborate, we can work. We just talked about the grounding of the Nigerian Air Force in Burkina Faso based on relationships that had gone quite sour. Thankfully, diplomatic talks have now made that release possible. But if we're talking truly about the problems plaguing this region, we must look inwards first of all. The next point on that, which I think is an important point he made, was media propaganda. Yeah. He talked about media propaganda and how the West has been spewing narratives that are considered toxic and hateful. And I think that's important. And that's why we keep talking about Africa owning media to tell Africa's story from an African perspective. If you do a quick search, Vimbai, you would hardly find reports from this particular summit because those media owners have killed the story. And so that's why when we talk about narratives, and media is powerful, he talks about the dangers of that. So if we must tell Africa's story, part of the war from the West is the way they spin stories, the way they spin narratives. And so we must also ensure that media on the African continent is strong and has a strong voice to tell the African story.
Absolutely.
Okay. First, the crisis in the Great Lakes region. Now, there was this meeting December 4 called the Washington Accord, which President Trump described as a great miracle. Before then, there had been a prior meeting in June where President Trump saw a pretty Angolan reporter and was excited. And then there was a meeting in Doha, I think on November 15, to try to find peace between the Rwanda-backed M23 and also the forces of President Tshisekedi of DRC. Now, as the meeting in Washington was being held, that same day, there was crisis back home in the Kivu region, North and South Kivu region, and particularly in the city of Uvira and Goma. And now, Marco Rubio, I'm trying to plot the trajectory of that crisis, intervened and said there will be action against the Rwandan-backed M23. However, what then happened was that the M23 now said, okay, we will pull out. And they started pulling out November 17. And now you have a situation whereby the people are now saying, don't go, because we have had better, security situation with the M23 coming around. And that they didn't want the Wazalendo and also the militias, the FARDC, and also the FLDC, that they didn't want them. So here, two issues. One, is this a case of a Stockholm syndrome? Because the M23 is not as if their intervention in that Kivu region, province they call it, they don't use the word region, it's not altruistic. So, but what is established is that there is no peace yet. The great miracle that President Trump talked about between Rwanda and DRC has not come to pass. And that is why the people themselves are asking for a UN-backed mechanism to ensure peace in that particular province. If you have peace in that province, will you have peace in other provinces? You asked the question as to the Alliance des États Sahel, AES, that what is the implication of their latest meeting for ECOWAS? The first implication is that what Ibrahim Traoré was saying is a further reaffirmation of the weakness of democracy in Africa. Two, what he's saying is not surprising. He's saying dark winter, chaos is coming, a bloody season is coming. That's the meaning of a dark winter, more or less. Now, because he says the imperialists are coming to attack us, now, he did not provide evidence in that regard. So it's scaremongering. It's as far as I am concerned. Number three, when he took power in 2022, he said that democracy does not guarantee, is not the best form of governance. So what do you expect him to say? He will say democracy is not working and that there is hypocrisy in democracy. However, what is clear is that there is competition for ECOWAS. It is that the region is divided. The economic populism of Ibrahim Traoré, Assimi Goïta, and in Niger and Chad and all of that, I don't think it will endure. I think that what is important is that ECOWAS leaders should not relent in saying that there must be progress in terms of democratic consolidation, rather than the retreat that we have seen in West Africa and other parts of Africa. Well, there's no time to comment on the U.S. barring, but the Americans talk about extraterritorial overreach. that is consistent with President Trump saying European leaders are weak and all of that. You know, it's just geopolitics. All right.